When you're ready to publish your website and make it available for other people to see, you'll need some kind of web hosting or web server to transfer it to. Dreamweaver makes it relatively easy to transfer files from your local computer to a remote hosting site. And you'll find many commercial services that provide web hosting, usually for a monthly or annual fee. If you work for a big corporation or a university, you may want to transfer your files across a local network. No matter how you publish your site, to set up the process, you'll need to go into the Manage Sites option. You'll find this here in the Files panel, and you'll also find it under the Site menu when you choose Manage Sites. If you have multiple sites loaded in Dreamweaver, you'll need to select the one that you want to publish before you click the Edit button. Make sure you've selected the Advanced tab at the top of this dialog, and then choose the Remote category. Now notice here under Access that there are 4 options. If you're working with a commercial service provider, a web server or web hosting system, all of these terms get used interchangeably, you're almost certainly going to want the FTP option. If you're working for a university or a big corporation, you might very likely use the Local Network option, in which case you'll need to talk to the system administrator about the information you need to enter into Dreamweaver and how to establish that connection. If you're using WebDAV or IDS, which are useful tools for better managing sites, especially when multiple people work on the site, you will find these options under the Access list as well. If you don't even know what those acronyms mean, don't worry about it. Almost certainly, you're going to use the FTP option. Now, before you can transfer your files to a remote host or to a web server, you need to connect to that server. And most commercial web servers and most non-commercial servers require some kind of login and password in order to do so. Well, you wouldn't want just anyone transferring files to your website, right? So you should get this information from your service provider. Usually when you establish an account with a commercial service provider, they'll send you some kind of document that includes the FTP login information. And in that information, you should find the name to enter in the host field. What you enter in the FTP host field is going to depend on your web server, but for the most part it's going to look something like this, ftp.domainname.com. Now I've entered Techie Translator here because I've set up a host using techietranslator.com, and this is a domain that I use almost exclusively for this kind of teaching and for showing people how to transfer files to a server. You would enter in here whatever your domain name is, or possibly you would enter something like ftp.thedomainofyourhost.com/some name for you. So again, you need to check with your service provider to find out what that is. The host directory is an added bit of information you can enter here that will take you directly to the subdirectory on the web server where you actually want to transfer the files for your website. I'll leave that blank for a moment so that I can show you what I mean by that. The login and password are not optional. For most servers, you have to have some way of establishing a connection. So my login is Techie Translator. And I'm not going to tell you what my password is. Come on. Like most programs, Dreamweaver shields the password as you enter it with those dots. Once you have that much information in, you should be able to hit this test button and see if you are able to establish a connection. Here you see Dreamweaver is confirming that I've successfully connected to the server and that indeed this FTP host login and password will work properly. Now some commercial service providers will also require that you check this Use Passive FTP field. You'd simply check that here if they tell you to use Passive FTP. If you have firewall issues, you may need to go into the firewall settings. But again, unless you've learned that from your system administrator or from your service provider, you probably can leave all of these things as they're established. Once you've set this up, hit test, and you know it works, that's all the information that you need to enter. So just click OK, click Done, and now we can establish a connection to that server by simply clicking on this button. It connects to the remote host. But before I do, let me click on this button, the one at the far right of the dialog, to expand this Files window. Notice now that Dreamweaver has brought the Files window up to the forefront of the program, and it's expanded it to have two panes, one for the remote site and one for local files. You can click and drag to move this around or to expand the size of the dialog. But here on the right, you see all of the files on my local computer. This represents the kinds of files we've been building throughout this series. And this folder here is the root folder that we established in the site setup process for our site. So everything that's in this root folder now needs to be transferred to our remote site for it to become public. So again, this little icon that looks like a plug getting plugged into itself, just click on that, and once you're connected, you'll see that it transforms to look like it's connected. Now here's what I mean about that host directory that I didn't fill in when we first set up the FTP information. On my host server, I have several folders for things like log files, which record all of the traffic to my website. I also have a folder called TechieTranslator.com. Now on your host, this may say something very different. It may say HTML docs, or it may say web, but there should be a directory on your web server that is designed to contain all of the files in your website. So this folder, TechieTranslator.com, should correspond to this folder, my local root folder. And if I want to move files from my local computer to my web server, I can do it as simply as this. Click to select, and then click and drag to move that file over to the site. Now, Dreamweaver is going to tell me right away that I need to save the file before it can be transferred. Anytime you have files that you've been working on and haven't yet saved, Dreamweaver will automatically interrupt you with that. You'll also be prompted for dependent files, which I'll tell you about in a moment. Now to get that dialog back, I just go back to Window, Files, and now you can see that my index page has been transferred up to TechieTranslator.com. If I move the About file, which has already been saved and is not open, you'll see that it happens much more quickly. Again, Dreamweaver is asking me about dependent files. Dependent files are any files that appear in the file you're transferring. So for example, if I come over here to my Gallery 1 page, and I want to transfer this page, this image here in the middle would be considered a dependent file of my Gallery 1 page. Similarly, any other files like this banner image that are inserted into this page are considered dependent of that page. And Dreamweaver offers to transfer them for us because if you don't, then although the page itself will display on your web server, it will be missing these images and they'll just show up as broken image links. So the dependent files option is really designed to help ensure that you don't transfer a page without transferring all of the elements of that page. But you should also know that once you've transferred all of the files up to your server, you don't need to transfer them again every time. Now let's go back to Window, Files to open the Files dialog again. And before I transfer all of the files in the site up to the server, I want to take a moment to go back and do that extra step in the FTP setup process of identifying the host folder. Remember, we left that blank when we first set this up, but now I want to go back and specify that TechieTranslator.com is the name of this folder. Now, depending on your web server, this may be called HTML docs or simply web, but there should be a folder name within all the folders on your web server, which are likely to include things like your logs folder. There should be a folder where you store all of the files and subfolders of your site, and this folder should correspond to your local root folder. So now that we know the name of it, let's disconnect and specify it. Again, choose Manage Sites, Edit, go to Remote Info, and now we're going to add the name here in the host directory folder. And I want you to notice that I'm starting with a /. Whatever the name of the folder is on your server, you should add the / to this field before you enter that name. So now that I've added TechieTranslator.com, when I reconnect to the server, it will open directly into that folder. By the way, I mentioned earlier the check-in and check-out feature. If you're working with multiple people on one site, you enable that by checking here. And then you can specify your name and email address so that when you check a file out, Anybody else working on the same site will know it's yours. If you're working alone on a website, you certainly don't need this feature. But if you are working with a team of people, this can be a useful tool for making sure you don't overwrite each other's work as you upload files to the server. Click OK, click Done, and now I can reconnect to the server the same way just by clicking this little icon that looks like a plug plugging into itself. And notice now that Dreamweaver opened directly into that TechieTranslator.com folder. So now you can see the About file and the index file that we already put up here are at the root level of this folder, at the top level of this folder. And anything else we might want to transfer, like all the rest of the files on this site, we can transfer into that same directory. So we could now select everything in this folder by using Shift-click or Command-click to select any or all, and you can transfer multiple files and folders simultaneously. Now, we don't need to upload the About and Index files again. We haven't changed them since we uploaded them. But to keep this simple, I'm just going to click there and then Shift-click or Command-click to select everything in the directory, and let's upload it all at once. Now, you can click and drag it over to Techie Translator, or you can use the Put Files icon here at the top of the window to transfer all of the files. Again, Dreamweaver is going to ask if you want to put dependent files. I'm going to say no, because in this case I'm transferring everything. I don't need to worry about dependent files. I am going to say yes to saving files because, again, any files you haven't saved need to be saved before you transfer the files. So whether you're transferring one file or all the files in your site, you need to make sure that any open files that haven't been saved are saved before they're transferred. So again, if I go back to the Files folder, you'll see here in the bottom left-hand corner the progress of the site being uploaded.